2, 1.
Welcome. This is Tetra Tech's live event webinar titled Using the Dip in the Pandemic Curve to Conduct an After-Action Review. We will begin the broadcast shortly at 1:30 Eastern. If you have any questions, comments, or technical issues, please use the Q&A window to privately submit them. If you want to try out the Q&A window right now, feel free to test it out. Let us know the audio is working, how things are in your neighborhood, or if there's any webinar technical questions. If you're having trouble with the audio, please check the volume on your local device. Sometimes you just need to boost the volume of your laptop or PC. We'll start at the bottom of the hour. Good afternoon and welcome to everybody in attendance today. My name is Jeremy Kaufman. I'll be moderating this installment of Tetra Tech's COVID-19 live event webinar series. Today's topic is using the dip in the pandemic curve to conduct a COVID-19 after action review. As we get started, you can send troubleshooting questions using the Q&A tab in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Hopefully we can address most of these technical questions early on through that tab. We will also be collecting questions throughout today's seminar on the content. Please populate the Q&A tab and we will respond back after this presentation. Make sure to include your name and email so that we can get back to you directly. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Steve Dillon. He has been with one of our thought leaders in Tetra Tech's exercise and training program for over a decade. He is a master exercise practitioner and routinely leads clients through the after-action processes for exercises in real-world incidents. Prior to retiring from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources in 2008, Steve was a law enforcement officer and was routinely assigned to the Ohio State Emergency Operations Center. He also served in several leadership roles on the state's incident management team. Steve, welcome to the webinar series.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. It's good to be with everybody today. I hope everybody's doing well. Pardon me. Hey, let's talk about after action reports and what a opportune time for us to do that. So on our agenda today, we're going to talk about some things. One of the things we're going to talk about is the culture of improvement and after action review stakeholders, having the right people involved in your process, and after action report organization, improvement plan implementation, and we'll talk about lessons learned as well. So why now? You know, why is this discussion coming up now? It is timely. All cycles, all incidents and events have a cycle. And we're at a place now, as we look in respect to the COVID-19 example that we have here, we're at a place where we can institute a after-action review process and really get it started and building up steam. I would like to say this, that you know, you can start your after-action process much earlier. And organizations that have a culture of improvement, they often start collecting data at the very beginning of an incident or an event. And they lay out the parameters for how we're going to collect data and information and observations that are going to contribute to an after-action report. But it's definitely an opportune moment at this time in respect to COVID-19 and and incidents that have a a similar response curve or surge period, and then things start to slow down a little bit, we can start to direct our thoughts to what we can do better. Let's go ahead and let's talk about what an after-action report is. So, an after-action report process is simply a process to improve. You know, I like to use the analogy of mining ore. You know, in the end, what we want to do is create a product that's going to give us some value based on the experiences that we've had from the incident or event. When you mine ore, you have the raw material that's hopefully going to give you something precious at the end. When I mean ore, I mean, you know, a precious metal like gold or silver or something like that. The after-action report process collects that raw material, that raw ore, and allows us to refine it into a precious metal that will point us towards improvement. And just an analogy to help us understand the process. So one of the first things we need to do is we need to organize how we're going to collect the information, the raw ore, so to speak, the data of the things that we've observed during the incident or event that we've just gone through. And we call these observations. Now, observations can be in the form of things that people, strengths and areas for improvement that they observed. They could jot those down, or it could be data as well. And it's and that data and those observations, we gather those from the stakeholders and people who have gone through the incident or event that we've just gone through. So identifying those stakeholders is important. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So one of the challenges then is to take those observations and that data and to categorize it. Categorize it into categories or types of activities that are common to each other. You know, in the Homeland Security world, in the public health world, in the hospital world, they have these things called capabilities, and capabilities are categories of activities that are similar to each other. And these categories lend themselves to, these capabilities lend themselves to these natural categories for us to categorize observations. So for example of that would be this. Let's say we wanted to collect information about how well we communicated with each other and shared information. One of those categories or capabilities, we would call it, would be communications and information sharing. So we would take all the observations that are similar to that, you know, that relate to that capability, and we would kind of categorize them into that category. It's important to organize observations and data in that way at the outset of the after-action report. So, you know, with FEMA, they have 32 capabilities. Some of them are fatality management. Some of them are command and coordination, resource management. Continuity of operations are another common one that exists. And some of these capabilities cross over as well. These categories cross over to hospitals, the private sector, public health, but they just have some different activity flavors to them. The big message is this, is that however you organize these categories, it needs to be organized in a way that works for your organization. It could be that you take these observations and you categorize them based on mission areas, and mission areas are just a term we use in the Homeland Security world to describe whether it's in the prevent phase, the protection phase, the response phase, the recovery phase, or the mitigation phase of the incident or event. You could categorize them that way. Or you can categorize them by phases that you identify in the event that you just went through. Or you could categorize them based on the business model. For a private organization, maybe you categorize it based on the organizational structure. So, you know, one of the really beneficial things that people can do if they do not have an established set of capabilities that they utilize for planning and training and that sort of thing, like Homeland Security does in public health and hospitals and some others, is they can actually outline those capabilities within their organization. And once they do that, that becomes a strong foundational tool for the after action process. So whatever you do, you need to categorize these observations and this data in some fashion so it makes sense for you, so you can apply the information to your organization. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to identify root cause. So we're going to analyze those observations. And we use our example. Let's say we use our example where we're looking at a capability of fatality management. So, or continuity of operations. And we analyze each one of these observations and the data that we collected from our stakeholders and our sources. And we analyze it to ask this question: what is the root cause? Why did things happen the way they happened? You know, we wanted things to happen a certain way, but it didn't happen that way. Why? There's different models out there that get you to root cause. Probably one of the most common ones is the why staircase. So when you're confronted with an observation that says that, I'll give you an example. The call center was not able to handle the volume of calls or address the questions people had. That's an observation, let's say, that was turned in an after action review process. Well, why? Why was the call center not able to do this? Well, they couldn't do it because they didn't have the number of phone lines. They didn't have the training they needed or the information tools they needed. Let's ask why one more time. Why? Because we weren't able to get the needed phone lines, or they've not had training, or we didn't have a bulletin for them. And you see, as we get more granular, we start to come up with the root cause. The root cause is that we didn't have the communications architecture needed to address the problem, or the call center folks did not have the tools they needed or the training they needed to answer the questions they needed, or because people were telecommuting from home. Another example, they didn't have the guidance they needed for something. So once we drill down at that level, we can start making recommendations on things to strengthen. We can strengthen the ability of the call center to take calls by enhancing the architecture, the communications or the phone architecture, phone systems, by adding so many phone lines, et cetera, or providing training on how to, for conflict resolution or addressing problems. Whatever the root cause is, we can make recommendations from that. And that is this stair-step process that we use in developing the after action process, the review, gathering the information, analyzing it, identifying root cause. Pardon me, I'm going to get a drink of water here. Suggesting recommendations or writing recommendations, and then creating approved corrective actions. That's going to happen later. But what the after action review process does, it takes all of this and it blends it together, all these findings, all this analysis, all the recommendation, and it blends them together into a strategy to improve. And that's what we want to do. Well, let's look at building a culture of improvement. You know, during a response or an event or an incident, we make immediate fixes and little fixes as we go along, and so we make fixes, and we try to adjust, and we see where there's a problem. We make those little corrections, and then we also, what happens at the end is that we want to have something that's meaningful and make long-lasting change. So what after action reports do for us, and by building a culture of improvement, what that does for us is that it documents all those immediate and small fixes that we make, and it helps us identify the long-term fixes that we make. So they may be short-term, high-yield type, fixes that were done reactively, but the after-action review process also has us thinking strategically and for the long term. So it blends those two, which is a very powerful concept for us as we get into this cycle of improvement. So how do you build a cycle of, build a culture of improvement? What is this? A culture of improvement is something that becomes a culture within the organization. It's been my experience that it starts from the top down, and it uses a standardized approach that is developed, and it works for both planned events and unplanned events. Here's a really important one, is that it focuses on capabilities, organizational capabilities. It doesn't focus on personalities or people, because when you do that, it no longer becomes a safe place for people to contribute information. So the leadership says, hey, it's safe for Steve, who's a field employee, to provide observations, frank observations on how things went. And when we start focusing on individuals, that changes, and that's not a good thing. So we always focus on capabilities, organizational capabilities, instead of people. Good after action, a good building improvement culture also utilizes a team. Now you can get somebody to do this for you, and I've developed after action review processes and after action reports for many folks. But should you like to do this, however you do this, you want to use a team approach that has people that can take the observations and analyze them, that are subject matter experts or have understanding of the plans, policies, and procedures that the organization has. They know what it should have looked like as opposed to what it did look like. And they do that in an objective way. And as I said earlier, they don't focus on people, they focus on the capabilities. And they evaluate against a standard. A standard may be a plan, it might be a best practice. It's not a person's opinion on how things should be. It should be based on some vetted standard. And sometimes, a standard does not exist. And that's one of the beautiful things that comes out of the after action report, is that where once there might have been confusion and there was no planning or direction on something, one of the corrective actions and recommendations that can come out of this thing is that we have this plan. All right. And this is what results in this continuous improvement culture. We plan, we train, we respond, we revise, and continue. So what's the difference between a planned event and an unplanned event? It's an important nuance. In a planned event, we know the capabilities that we're going to utilize and that we're going to ask people to demonstrate. We know that they're going to have to demonstrate these lists of tasks or activities, and we can categorize them. And as I said, maybe it's continuity of operations, maybe it's fatality management, maybe it's medical surge, maybe it could be a variety of them. We know that in advance. And then we take that information, it's categorized, we look for root cause, and we create recommendations. In an unplanned event, we don't have the luxury of having that list of capabilities. So we need to assess what are those capabilities that we need to categorize things into. And sometimes you have to wait for the observations to come in. Or you have to go ahead and create the capability list and solicit information for each one of those capabilities if you want to get meaningful information. You still then analyze for root cause and you make for recommendations, but you may not know what all those capabilities are that you need to be looking at in an unplanned event until that information starts coming in from your stakeholders. So who should be involved in the after action report process? Well, let's look at our participants. There's really two phases. There's the phase where you want to gather information from people, and you want their observations because they were involved in the event and they have the information. They have the raw ore that you're going to turn into this fine metal of improvement. So initially, it's going to be a pretty large list of folks, everybody that's involved. And remember, it's important that you not exclude people. It's my recommendation you not exclude someone because they may have, even though they may not be, a good example might be a private-public partnership, they might have a piece to the puzzle that you need that otherwise you won't have if they're excluded from providing observations and information. So it's important to have the right people contributing those observations and the data. And then there's the phase where we move into the refinement. So we want to have that team that is helping refine the observations and ask those questions about root cause and develop the recommendations. And finally, there's that last group that's going to make the decision about what recommendations to implement and what not to implement, or what to change and what not to change. And that is those people need to have authority within the organization to implement change, to affect the bottom line of the agency or the organization. So keep that in mind as you pick the folks to be involved. So what's your after action report format supposed to look like? My recommendation is to keep it simple. You can go to the Homeland Security Exercise Evaluation Program HC Toolkit website, and there are examples there for you, and they're great examples. But typically, I've seen some really good formats lately, and the one format I saw just recently had a one-page overview of the incident. It had an executive summary of the top strengths and areas for improvement. And don't forget, in your after action process, you want to call out the strengths that you observed of what was done well. And I try to balance them. I recommend you try to balance them in your executive summary. So identify your strengths, but also identify the areas for improvement that need to occur. And then we have the analysis of objectives or analysis of capabilities section. And this is where it can get lengthy, especially if you're in a science-based organization or science-based discipline that has a lot of data that needs to be handled. I encourage you to try to synthesize that away from the AAR and try to make that in some usable format or graphic that reads well in the after action report. So this analysis of objectives or capabilities, pardon me, it analyzes the capabilities, the observations, and then we have the recommendations based on root cause. And finally, we have this thing called the improvement matrix. The improvement matrix. Let's go ahead and go to the matrix here and I'll explain that. So I hope you can see this graph that's here, this matrix that's laid out. I'll walk you through it. It's a great tool, especially if you're the person who's responsible for monitoring and implementing the corrective actions. So the matrix is usually created during the after action meeting. When you come into the after action meeting, the after action report is still in draft format, and it may have the capability category, which is on the left column, We see 3 of them there: emergency operations coordination, public information, information sharing. And then it may have the recommendations or the observations listed. And sometimes folks will want to have the improvement actions already pre-populated in here, but a lot of times the senior officials are asked to work through those and to identify, based on the programmatic people that are present, the people that know their programs, they may actually write the improvement actions at that time. Either way is fine, but definitely the senior officials will want to validate those, look at them, and refine them, because this is what is going to take place. So in an example of the first one, it's talking about strengthen the capability to rapidly and accurately document data and information. And the corrective action was to develop guidelines and conduct training for staff on call and message taking and documentation of essential elements of information and maintaining an event tracker. That's kind of a two-part or three-part corrective action. It probably could have been broken out into 3 different corrective actions. But as you'll see, going to the next column, under the element, the element there, it says that this is a planning element and a training element that needs to be addressed. And it's assigned to the health department. And it's assigned to a person to implement by a certain date. Now, so this matrix is completed at the after action review meeting. And once it is finished, then we finalize the after action report. Now you look at on the far right side there's a little acronym with on a vertical axis, and it says POETI. Typically, all corrective actions fall into one of these categories: plans, organization, equipment, training, and exercises. So that's why it's so important, as you can see, to have the right people there, the senior officials there at the table, who are going to be able to implement these fixes. So let's go to the last part of the presentation, and that's implementation. You know, implementation is so important, and this requires the guidance and influence of the senior leaders, where they say, we will participate in this process, we will integrate the results into our management system, we will support a continuous cycle of improvement, we will support tracking and accountability, and people are going to be assigned based on their fiscal, programmatic, and organizational authority to support the process and implement the changes. It's very, very important. Otherwise, we've kind of wasted our time if we don't take this next implementation phase. So one of the great things that comes out of these types of reports are lessons learned. And lessons learned are valuable for all our communities. You may find something as a result of your after action report that is a great strength or area for improvement that you identified, and you think it needs to be shared with a larger audience. You can do that through the Homeland Security Digital Library, which is, I believe, is maintained by the Naval Postgraduate School. And there's a variety of lessons learned there. And so don't forget to call out those lessons that you learned that other people will benefit from, and strengthen your community, your discipline, and your organization. So in conclusion, you know, Jeremy and Jen and I were talking yesterday, and Jeremy Kaufman and Mr. Kaufman asked me, he said, Steve, what's an example of something that you think the after action review process has really made a difference? And I've done a lot of them, and I've done them for large events and small events. But the one that stands out to me the most is the one I think where I saw the most meaningful change. And I saw a modest-sized health department embrace the culture of improvement, and it just changed their organization. This became a part of who they were, and they used the after-action review process to strengthen their capabilities. And in the end, it was very interesting to see larger health departments and other organizations coming to them, and affiliated organizations and partners and stakeholders come to them and say, hey, we've seen that you do a great job of this. What's your secret? So that was probably one of the most beneficial, and I've seen that numerous times, but one in particular just kind of jumps out. So I wish the same success for you all as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Kaufman. Thank you for your time. It's been good to be with you today, and I wish you the best as you mine the precious metal of improvement, especially during this phase of the COVID incident and during similar incidents of this nature when you apply your after-action review process. Thank you.
Steve, thanks for your insights today. For attendees, this presentation and previous COVID-19 webinars is available at the Tetra Tech website. Our next presentation is going to be on the implications of COVID-19 hurricane planning. And rest assured, this is more than just spacing folks out in shelters. All registered attendees to today's seminar will automatically receive an invitation to this and future seminars. If you did have a question that you'd like us to answer, please throw it in the comment question and answer box, and Steve Dillon and myself and a couple others will be getting back to you later today. Thanks again, everybody, for your time.